You know how you get a text alert from the delivery driver before your food arrives, so your hungry kids stop freaking out? Vonage does that.
Okay, welcome back to the PyCon Malaysia 2021. Today we will continue our session with me, okay, your moderator, Asraf Gipilin, and here welcoming our guest, uh, Mr. DeveloperSteve. Hello,
Hello.
hello. Okay, it's nice to meet you for our session today.
Thank you for accepting my talk and for letting me speak. And hello to everyone.
I think most of the audience will probably exhausted for now because the event started from the early of the morning and continue until now. So okay, today we will Mr. Steve will uh, give his talk about what's it called again? Uh,
Stranger danger.
Yes, that's one. Okay, so without further ado, okay, I will welcome Mr. Developer Steve to give his talk. Yeah,
Awesome. Thank you. Just get my screen to come in too, please, if I can. I think it's still sharing. There we go. Thank you. Awesome. All right, let me switch over to the screen. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining this session on Stranger Danger at PyCon Malaysia. Really excited to be here. Before I get underway, I just wanted to do a big shout out to the amazing organizing team behind PyCon. Big virtual clap. One of the things I've done like so many conferences and meetups all over the world over the years. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but the organizing team is usually made up of very passionate volunteers. So big round of applause and massive thank you to the amazing organizing team behind PyCon Malaysia. One of the things I love most, about open source communities and open source, well, just open source in general, is that it's powered by these amazing volunteers that make these sort of events possible. So if you're looking to get involved in this sort of thing, please reach out and see how you can help, see how you can get involved and be able to help pull community events like this together. So hello and welcome to my talk on Stranger Danger. I have a disclaimer before we get underway, and actually today I'm going to try and do one of the most scariest demos I have ever done. Hopefully it works. It should work. This is fine. But anyway, my disclaimer at the start is I love tech jokes. So I have a whole lot of them, and I think in general, I think it's always important we keep smiling. So, and this is an open source joke, so please share it with everyone because yeah, it's important we always keep smiling, particularly in current times. And I hope everyone is safe and well. So, why did the vulnerability get tired? You might be wondering, why would a vulnerability get tired? It's because it ransomware. Oh. And so, hello, my name is DeveloperSteve. So, funny story, my name is actually legally DeveloperSteve. I'm acting like I'm surprised at that, but I already know that my name's that. So it's actually my middle name, and I've been a developer advocate for a number of years. I'm currently the senior developer advocate at a company called Sneak. But previously, I was a developer advocate or evangelist at PayPal Braintree, at Xero, the accounting company, at Telstra, which is an Australian telecommunications company, at IBM. And being an evangelist or an advocate, it's kind of fun because I get to go out and geek out with amazing communities all over the world, including like I am today. But people started calling me Developer Steve. So when I got married a few years ago, and that's my wedding photo on the top right, when I actually, that wedding cake, I 3D printed that the night before my wedding because I like to live dangerously with demos sometimes. Thankfully, it didn't catch fire, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, me and my wife combined our last names. So Cooper plus Houchin became Kuchin, which is my married name. And when I was legally changing my name, I thought, you know what? I'm going to make Developer Steve my middle name. So it is actually my middle name. Yeah, it turns out you can do that. It's one word too. So anyway, but irrespective to all that, like I've been coding since a very young age. I've literally been coding since the age of 8 when I taught myself Q Basic. And if anyone remembers the good old days of Basic, please drop it in the chat. Also, if you have any questions as we're going through, just drop it in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Also, if you want to put in emojis, face palms, whatever it is, please put it in the chat. Anyway, I've been coding since the age of 8, which was in the days of Q Basic. And back then, back in my day, back in my developer origin story days, anyway, we didn't have libraries or a lot in the way of open source. There wasn't a way for the industry as we know it today to be able to come together and share all these amazing ideas, or indeed to be able to work on community projects that everyone can use and be able to build applications on. And even going through my developer origin story, as I like to think about it, one of the things I did early on to be able to get some experience, particularly with building out development projects or coding projects, was build a bunch of different startups, which literally just started as an idea. Like, you know, when you sort of look at something and you think, gee, wouldn't it be fun if that website did this thing, or if there was an app that did this particular thing? So using those sort of ideas, I was able to build out some startups, which basically gave me a whole bunch of experience. And on top of all that, even in digital agency days, so building out single campaign websites, building out some really basic applications that let people order food, take photos, connect to each other. Like, these are all ways through my developer origin story that I was able to build on experience I already had, but also learn new techniques and new things. And as a developer, one of the things I love the most, and in particular to Python, is actually, this code on the screen, I actually really like Flask. I like Django too and all the other frameworks, but Flask is one of my favorites. So anyway, one of the things I like with like using something like Flask, for example, is as a developer, I can build out some really quick and easy websites that influence my end users in so many different ways. If you think about all those applications where you visit a website and you're able to connect with people, or order food, or order a thing, order products, or just be entertained. As developers, we build out these experiences and enable our end users to do things that affects their everyday lives, which is kind of cool because like that's why I became a developer pretty much. One of the things I've always been mindful of, though, in my developer origin story is what else is my application that I'm deploying, what else is being exposed to the wider internet. If you think about an iceberg, the very tip of the iceberg above the surface, if you think of it in terms of your application, that sort of it becomes a good analogy for what your application is. That code that you're writing for your users to be able to interact with, well, your server, is that publicly accessible code surfaced to the public internet. And when you think sort of further down the stack and even down to the open source level, that code that you write is built on top of the next layer down, which is open source libraries, open source components. Like, so many times that, even going back through my developer origin story, so many times I've deployed an application that 3 weeks later I have to go clean it up again because all of a sudden there's all these nasty things starting to surface on above the water or above the top of the iceberg. So many times, like, I've deployed something where I've had to go back and clean it up because I inadvertently deployed something or utilized a particular component that I didn't really understand the security implications of what I was doing or what I was deploying. And special mention here, and like, I've been here before too, where you find that particular solution on Stack Overflow or on Reddit that may solve that problem that you're having. Usually it's at the really early hours of the morning, like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m., where you find that particular piece of code, which you're not really sure what it does, but it kind of seems to like fix that particular problem that you're having. This is where we start, as developers, we need to be more mindful of the code, well, the code that we're utilizing, but also the libraries that we're using inside our applications. Of course, something we've seen over the years is the exponential growth of the open source ecosystem, which I always love. Again, like, I'm a big fan of the open source ecosystem, and for the most part, and I'm sure all of you are too, we're all products of this open source ecosystem. If you think all the times, like even today's conference, where there's all these people coming together to freely share their knowledge and be able to learn from each other, that's one of the things I love the most. And also we see this in the exponential growth in the number of packages in each ecosystem over the years. So if you look at PP, for example, and I've got some stats talking about this, some amazing stats talking about this on the next slide, spoilers. If you look at the holistic growth that we're seeing in these ecosystems now, like quite often what we see with some of the communities or some of the libraries is particular base functionality will be split off into a dependency, which then gets used across the holistic ecosystem because that piece of functionality can be reused across the whole ecosystem, which is really cool. And of course, in PP, for example, we've seen like phenomenal growth. There's over 300,000 packages currently on PP alone. And in the last week, there was 2.6 billion downloads of packages, which is like crazy amazing. Last month alone, there was 11 billion downloads of packages from the PP ecosystem, which like is mind-blowing, staggering. Of course, something we're seeing now, though, alongside those sort of numbers, is the emergence of vulnerabilities which are being surfaced across these ecosystems, which is somewhat concerning. Again, thinking back to my aims as a developer in building out those applications for my end users, like keeping my end users in mind. If you think about the vulnerabilities that's also being exposed inside their applications, this is where we need to do more due diligence to protect those users that we're trying to get using our applications. Quite often, depending on ecosystem too, we're seeing a mix between direct vulnerabilities being surfaced in open source packages and indirect. So NPM, for example, we see a lot of indirect packages which are causing vulnerabilities to surface in that iceberg stack. PP, for example, we see a lot of direct vulnerabilities being surfaced in, a lot of vulnerabilities being surfaced in direct libraries. So this is, installing that particular package, which causes there to be a vulnerability in your application, which can then be used by a malicious attacker to exploit your application and, in essence, compromise those users that we're trying to protect, that we're building these applications for. Actually, something, and I've been keeping a pretty close eye on new vulnerabilities coming out, but something we're seeing now is not only in libraries and in platforms that are being used by, for web development or app development, but also in data platforms too now. So TensorFlow, for example, I've been tracking this one pretty heavily since May. We're starting to see a lot of vulnerabilities appear in the base TensorFlow libraries. Now, it's important to note here too, and I've actually been looking at trying to do some demos with this. The thing to keep in mind with this one is because of the way TensorFlow is utilized, it may not necessarily be directly used with a website or an application. But the risk here is, particularly with some of these vulnerability types that are being raised, that a chatbot, for example, can be utilized to craft the attack. I guess, and this is actually one of the demos I've been looking to do with some of these vulnerable libraries and dependencies in TensorFlow, is basically getting a chatbot to convince itself that it's vulnerable. Anyway, that's a whole other talk. Maybe that's for next year. But you can see what I'm saying with these vulnerabilities for TensorFlow directly may not surface in a web application or in an iceberg stack, but the data going in, particularly if it's not sanitized properly, can cause these sort of risks to appear inside your data stack as well now. Now, it's important to note, and again, like I'm a big fan of open source, the communities, the libraries, like all the work that's put into it, and in particular, us as an ecosystem being able to utilize that to build out some really cool applications. Now, if you're not already contributing back, this is a part where I say, please contribute back. If you're not already contributing back where you can to some of the libraries or the communities that you're using, please do, because these communities do amazing work. And quite often what we see is there's sometimes a time delay between a security researcher raising vulnerabilities back on the repos or the repositories, and there being a patch or a fix basically distributed as part of a release candidate, or even being investigated within these groups. So, and a lot of these communities are basically run by passionate volunteers too. So if you can, where possible, always remember to contribute back. I know you probably already do. I just like to mention it. One of the ways we do that at Sneak, and actually I'm going to be looking at this in the demo section. Actually, we've got 2 demo sections today. One of the demo sections, I was going to dig into this one a little bit more, but Django, which is also one of the Python frameworks like I've used previously, Sneak Advisor is a program that we run to basically try and help with a few things. One being some due diligence for developers to understand the components that they're using inside their applications or as part of their open source stack or as part of their iceberg stack, but also to build awareness with the different community groups, any new vulnerabilities that may be appearing, and where we can, we'll actually contribute back. I am actually going to mention Node at a Python conference, but this is one of the extensions to this program that we basically work with with an ecosystem to try and not only raise awareness for different vulnerabilities that are appearing, but also try and help with patch deployment and basically trying to help the ecosystem. Again, we're just trying to help an application owner or a different community group be able to understand the security risks that are currently open and try and mitigate those as best as possible. So let's have a look at some methods to basically secure Python and make it more, well, protect our end users, because we love them. Just before I do, just remember, please, if you're watching live, please drop any comments, questions, face palms, emojis into the chat function on YouTube, and we'll get to those at the end. So, oh yeah, if you're watching the pre-recording, or wait, pre-recording? No, if you're watching the recording and you wanted to reach out, please do. I am literally DeveloperSteve anyway, so, or most places anyway. Anyway. Python secure coding techniques. So the first one's pretty easy. If you're taking an app to production, please remember to make sure the debug false flag is on, just so you're not displaying any unwanted error messages or any sort of information making it publicly available that anyone can exploit. Always remember, actually, I have an example of this that we're going to look at too, but always remember to use any app-based passwords or secrets for databases or third-party services. Make sure you include those into an end file where possible. That just means basically no hard coding. Please, no hard coding. See, I should have put a no hard coding meme on this, but I'll put that in version control. And I know you all know this one. I just wanted to mention it. But if you've got existing legacy applications or an application you're supporting or an old application in one of the earlier Python versions, remember to upgrade to Python 3 when possible. One of the other ones I've noticed too is making sure you use relative paths with the $. Package so that it localizes the package install if you can. And then this is going to be partially dependent on how you deploy your infrastructure, but essentially this mitigates some known vulnerability types as far as file traversals go. And so file traversals are where a malicious attacker or a malicious actor is able to trick your application into navigating its own file system to do some really nasty things. Literally, I've seen this in the wild before. Well, I had it a couple times with, I won't mention the platform, it wasn't a Python one, but in my developer origin story in digital agency days, where I had a malicious attacker basically take control of some infrastructure and then use it for DDoS and a couple of other nasty things, or denial of service. So they can literally use it to attack other servers or other infrastructure from your server. And then you get a nasty bill at the end when your server's currently using like a lot of CPU and a lot of resources. Trust me, you do not want to be in the receiving end of one of those really big cloud hosting bills. So yeah, please make sure you're using relative paths as far as your package management goes. This one, everyone should know, but I always love reiterating it again. Please make sure you sanitize everything multiple times. By sanitize, I mean any user-based input or anything that is publicly available in the top part of your publicly accessible Iceberg code. Please make sure you're making sure that you sanitize, sometimes a few times if you need to, but sanitize that user input to make sure like nothing nasty is being stored in your database or being surfaced back to the user. I have an example of that we're going to look at in a little bit. Be careful with temporary files in particular, and there's an example of this in the Python documentation. If you are using this, please look at some of the alternatives that you can use. And again, there's some really good write-ups on the Python documentations on how to mitigate this. But and that's the warning there. They actually say that don't use this particular one. And if anyone is using it, please upgrade, or please look at using MKS temp, or just making sure that your temporary files, if they're being created, that they're being created and then destroyed as soon as you do not need them anymore, because that's really important. These two, and I always love mentioning these two span entire code languages. This is in PHP. There's, well, yeah, they all the code languages have exe and eval in some format. These are really, really, I don't want to say bad, but I'm going to say they here be dragons. Like, be very careful where you are using these. Quite often what I'll do, if ever I found myself in a situation where I've needed to use exe or eval, is to look at why I need to use it and what functionality, like what am I trying to solve with using these particular two. Essentially, these two in particular give your code, whatever code you put inside them, access to your server's shell. So all sorts of nasty things can happen, and I've seen all sorts of nasty things happen. I would use these extremely sparingly, and again, investigate why you need to use these functions if you've ever been tempted to use them. I'm going to mention, and this is possibly a good alternative, but with some, you need to keep in mind a particular thing with this, but subprocess call, which does something very similar, but you can by default shell equals false should be inactivated. Oh, activated. Activated sounds a better word. It should already be activated. And so you have to turn shell equals true on if you want it to interact with your shell. But it's a little bit safer as far as base functionality goes. This is serial. I'm gonna talk about serialization because this is a problem across every coding language. So much so that, again, in the documentation, I had an image in there. Oh, I didn't put it in. In the Python documentation, in particular for pickle, in Python it's pickle. In the documentation for pickle on the Python doc site, it basically says, do not trust this function at all, ever. I think with this one, again, like, look at what you need to do if you were looking to use this. First, investigate, like, what are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do? But more importantly, if you can, and this function is normally used to store and use a data set that's passed in usually through a user input, or from input that you're going to take from a database and store locally to do something with. The thing in particular with what makes this so vulnerable, or the serialization vulnerable across ecosystems, is as an attacker, I can store a stored function as part of that, like that data set, which can then be resurfaced through another part of the application. And all sorts of nastiness can happen. The serialization function actually isn't overly the problem. It's the deserialization of the data once you pull it back out. So as a malicious actor, basically I can store a malicious function inside that data set as an injection, which then gets resurfaced when I try and use that particular data element further on down through the application track. So serialization, here be dragons. Please be very careful. If possible, use a JSON function. Like it's a bit safer as far as being like handling a data set inside a stored array, if you will. So, but yeah, just please be very careful using pickle. I was going to put a meme in here that said, "Don't get caught into a pickle," but you get the idea. The important thing here, though, like when building out your applications in particular, is to make sure you don't surface anything inside that holistic iceberg stack, so that you don't let in any unwanted actions to be able to occur inside your applications. Remember, as developers, like we build these applications with our end users in mind, and we really need to make sure we're protecting their data and their experience as best as we possibly can. Basically, don't let in the nasties to party inside your server infrastructure, because, well, it's going to cost you a whole bunch of money. You love your users. Of course, these days we've seen the rapid adoption of scalable infrastructure. So, like in a cloud native world, your app is way more than your code. You think now that you can build an application locally in containerization, for example, in a Docker image, and then be able to deploy that onto infrastructure that can scale as your application is adopted by those amazing end users we're protecting. So Docker Hub, for example, sees 242 billion downloads of base container images to date, which is great because, like I was saying, as developers or as people building applications for our end users, this means rapid adoption of your application that can scale and have the elasticity that it needs in its infrastructure as the application grows. Gone are the days of those monoliths. Of course, with that, we've seen the emergence of vulnerabilities appearing in the official container images. In fact, the top 10 Docker container images basically each year carry the same vulnerabilities that we've just been talking about, because they're built from the same open source components. And again, this is about not only protecting and doing some due diligence at the code front, but making sure the infrastructure you're deploying these applications on doesn't carry the same vulnerabilities in them that you're protecting or trying to mitigate out of your iceberg code. The way I like to think about this is, with great containerization comes great responsibility. I do love that meme. We're going to be taking a look at this one because I have a scan that I've done on the Python container, which actually, this is really cool. There's over 1 billion downloads of the Docker Hub, where you can see on that slide, on the Docker Hub Python base image, which is like crazy cool. That is amazing. But yeah, we're gonna take a look at that one in a sec. Almost at the first demo. There's actually 2 demo spots. But anyway, the last part of our iceberg, holistic iceberg view for our application stack is infrastructure as code, which from a developer standpoint is amazing, because I can build out the infrastructure that I need as part of my application deployment and build in some really nice CI/CD pipelines along with it. So if you think, when you deploy that application, you can also put in some nice test scripts to make sure everything works the way that it should, but also build in some nice security scans as well to make sure that code and the packages you're deploying has everything it needs in a security sense, in a testing sense, before it hits that final production end phase. And of course, like, those test scripts always run every time. I'm looking at you, Jenkins, every time. No, first time. No, no one believes that. There's always that one space in the code somewhere that Jenkins will find, or whatever test script thing you're looking for. Anyway, runs every time. The important thing with those, particularly with those IAC configuration files, is just making sure there's no configuration issues as far as like permissions or traversal or access goes as part of your infrastructure deployment. Anyway, let's get on and have a look at our first demo app. So the first one I wanted to do is just to show you what something like a cross-site scripting attack looks like. And in particular, this uses a markdown, an exploit in a markdown library to, well, basically inject into the user's browser. I should switch to the application. There we go. Now on this Sneak GitHub, we have a whole bunch of these different test demo apps so that you can try it yourself at home, if you will. The important thing to remember is with these demo applications is these are for demonstration purposes only. Please do not take these to production because they have a lot of known vulnerabilities in them. This is intentional. It is, like I said, for educational reasons. Anyway, this first one we're going to look at now is a markdown input app. So just in a basic to do, as you can see there, if I go, this is a bold statement. So I can do basic markdown and then that'll re-displayed inside the user's browser. So as you can see there, the bold is bolded because, well, I did the markdown for bold. One of the things with libraries like this, or the exploits that we see in libraries like this, is what it does on user input is try to do some sanitization or some regex or some type of character matching as part of the input to try and take out any character sets that might cause any sort of vulnerability to appear. So as a malicious attacker, the trick with this is to try and figure out a character set that gets around that particular sanitization function and basically does some mischief. So this is a markdown input. So I can enter links like you would with normal markdown, something similar to that. And nothing malicious about that. It's basically doing what I expect it would do, and it would just take me to that particular website. One of the things to remember, particularly with a cross-site scripting attack, and that we're looking for in this, is as part of the user input, again, I'm trying to, as a malicious attacker, figure out a character set which basically gets around the sanitization function. So one of the ways an attacker will try and do that is by injecting something like JavaScript in as part of the user input so that it gets around the sanitization and then outputs into the user's browser or injects some SQL into a database, for example. So that there, for example, that didn't work because it was able to figure out that that's something we may not necessarily want in there and basically filter it out. One of the ways to get around that though is to URL encode some of the character sets, and then inside the JavaScript that we're trying to inject in this particular attack, basically use an object word from JavaScript like this, which gets around that whole sanitization piece on top of the URL encode character set encoding. So if I inject this one, which is very similar to last, you can see that actually works. Well, this works because it was using this. I think there's a pun there. Anyway, if I click that now, you can see I'm opening an alert box. And this is relatively harmless as far as a vulnerability attack goes, but there's also all sorts of nasty ways that a malicious attacker could use that, from stealing session information, stealing cookie information, or just redirecting the user's browser to a completely different website and doing more malicious things there. Anyway, let's have a look at a couple of other things. Let me make that a bit bigger. Like I said at the start, I love Flask. Flask is one of my favorite elements to use inside Python. It's so easy, it's so light, like you can build out some really quick websites with it. So I thought what I've done here is I've got, this is the public repo for the Python Flask sample app on CodeFresh contrib. This is literally just an off-the-shelf demo. There's full write-ups on it. I can make the links available if anyone wants it as well. What I've done is a few months ago, we've launched, Sneak launched code level scanning for Python inside Sneak Code. So what the scanning does is when we set up the machine learning processes behind Sneak Code, we take the entire language set for a particular language, in this case Python, and load that into the machine learning process that is then able to learn based on known vulnerability types for that particular language, and learn the combinations of Python or base code syntax that causes those vulnerabilities to exist. And then be able to surface that again, matching the same combinations inside your code base. So you can take an entire Python code app for example, scan it, and it's able to flag points of interest that may cause particular vulnerabilities to surface based on the code you've written. And you can see here, like this is that same repo, and I scanned it a little while ago, as you can see. And it's identified what I was saying as part of the presentation earlier, where it's actually recommending to hard code a secret key as part of the deployment for this application, which may not necessarily be the best thing to do, but what this does is flag it for you so you can determine whether it's something you are okay with or you want to fix and move it to a different location, for example. I was going to take a quick look at the latest TensorFlow as well, just to show you what I was talking about as far as vulnerabilities goes. There's actually a lot of them that I've been tracking, and actually in August, we saw a whole bunch more appear. So everything from denial of service to arbitrary code execution, which literally means if someone's able to inject into your processes, can use that to basically do some nasty things inside your server infrastructure. Please don't do that. But there's a whole bunch of them. Instead, what I'm going to do is take a look at the Sneak Advisor. Like I was saying earlier, this is the Sneak Advisor program, which lets you do some due diligence on like some of the stuff behind TensorFlow, including the number of weekly downloads, the commit frequency, even how quickly some of the things have been patched or some of the previous issues as well, right down the licenses as well. Actually, there's another one that I hadn't looked at yet, but I have used previously, which is PyTorch, which had some interesting stats in it as well. I've used this before to do some fun stuff in. Anyway, I'm not going to dig around that too much, but I just wanted to highlight it. Again, it's about using these sort of tools to understand some due diligence on the components that you're looking to use inside your workflows and stacks. Just lastly, I wanted to have a look at or show you the Docker scanning. So this is the Python thing I was talking about earlier, the Python image that I was talking about earlier. And I'm basically scanning the public repository from the official Docker Hub page. And here's one I prepared earlier. Depending on what platform you're running this in will be, as you can see, there's different vulnerabilities that have been surfaced inside some of the open source components used in these Docker images. So if I have a look at the Bullseye, well, that's a release candidate. Let's go with Bullseye 3.6. Yeah, I'll do 3.6. If we look at some of the files, and again, this is about doing the due diligence on the base images to see what's being surfaced and then what that means for your holistic stack. The thing to keep in mind particularly with Docker images is ideally it's better to start with the base possible minimal image and then only add in the components that you need depending on what your application needs to do. There is a Django one. We're running out of time. All right, not gonna go through that one, but anyway, this is basically all just running inside my free tier as well, I should point out. And if you wanted to try this yourself at home, I have a lot of projects in here. You can literally go add project and then monitor public GitHub repo, and it will just basically scan from the publicly available repo, which I always find handy because, well, you can be alerted about things potentially before they hit your production level stack. So again, this is about doing due diligence and making sure you know what you've got installed or what you're looking to use. Protect those end users, yo. Right, let me switch back to Prezo. Before we go on too far, again, if you've got any questions, comments, face palms, emojis, please pop them into the chat. Or if you're watching the recording later, please reach out and say hi. Anyway, we missed something really important here as a part of our iceberg stack, our holistic iceberg stack. We missed the developer environment. Yes. So this one's actually really scary because this has started surfacing a lot this year, where we're seeing the same vulnerabilities start to appear in development environments. For anyone using Homebrew at home on Mac, and like I use it extensively, there was actually a security alert that they put out earlier in the year on their blog saying that there was some vulnerabilities currently being mitigated or being fixed as part of their deployments. And this one, like I said, this one really scares me a lot. I'm actually going to show you why, because we're going to try and do this one live. I've done this one a few times. Most of the time it works every time. Anyway, the demo we're about to do is available on my GitHub. We also have full write-ups and all the disclosures that we did earlier, or that Sneak did earlier in the year from our security researchers that found these. But these vulnerabilities in particular are being surfaced inside VS Code. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. I'll step through it. But essentially, VS Code extensions, because they're built using the same open source components that we've just been looking at, we're now seeing the same vulnerability types appear in development environments like on VS Code. And again, this comes back to doing the due diligence and know what you're actually installing. The 4 vulnerabilities that we announced, or 4 VS Code extensions that we did release some research around earlier in the year, they were Latex Workshop, Open in Default Browser, Instant Markdown that we're going to be looking at today. It's probably one of the scariest ones. And I swear this last one is real. I'd never used it before, but Rainbow Fart. Yes, that's a thing. Anyway, I can make these links available after the chat, or if you want them, you can just check out my GitHub. I'm DeveloperSteve on GitHub. All right, let's give this one a spin. Let's see if it works. Should work. I am going to wake up my... Yeah, I thought that'd go to sleep. So what I'm doing here, because this one scares me so much, is I'm actually running OS X inside a VM. And I'm doing that because I didn't want to install the vulnerable extension version. And since we disclosed these vulnerabilities, the Instant Markdown maintainer basically fixed their extension. And so the current version is good. The previous version, please don't use that at home or anywhere, except if you're doing this demo, which we are. So instead of installing that in my local environment, I actually installed it in a VM. So that this other screen is the VM. This is the attack computer, or attacker computer. This is the one we're going to attack anyway. And I'm basically going to attack it from my local environment. So like I said, we're using Instant Markdown, not using the latest version, using the previous version. And full write-ups of this are also on my GitHub. So let me get rid of this screen. There we go. I'm actually using PHP to do this in, but you could just as easily use Python as well. Like, you could actually use Flask to do this. Essentially, on the attacker side, I'm going to be using ngrok, which I'm going to start now. And then I'm also using PHP's built-in server to do this. But again, you could just as easily use Python as well. So I'm just going to run a local server, which is now started, and then I'm serving that through ngrok. Inside there's two files inside this folder. There's an index and there's a track. The index side of things, I'm displaying a malicious website that we're going to utilize to basically, on the developer side of things, I'm going to exploit a particular port that's running on as part of the VS Code, and we'll go look at that in a moment. So we're going to be utilizing port 8090, which will be open as part of that particular VS Code extension. And basically, we're going to send a file over and then traverse the developer's environment to pull a file out and send it over. Now, the first time I saw this done, and this is on the Sneak YouTube, it was actually my manager's computer and one of our security researchers. And essentially, the security researcher was able to exploit this and pull out the password file from my manager's Mac. So hence why this one scares me so much. We're going to be doing something similar today, except I'll show you what we'll do on the attacker side in a moment. That's pretty much all this particular script does. Is once the user opens it, it tries to grab that particular file using the exploit through VS Code, and then once it grabs that file, it basically opens a bunch of iframes as part of the page load and tries to send it back to the same ngrok URL, and this just stores whatever post data is sent over. That's kind of it. So anyway, I don't want to install updates now. Remind me tomorrow. Everyone always clicks remind me tomorrow. No one ever installs. Anyway, on the developer computer, on our virtual computer, yeah, I'm still good. I've got one file that we're going to try and grab. It's a file called passwords, and it's sitting in the user home directory. So you can see that as a file called passwords. And inside that, where you can probably see on the screen, is the word can't touch this. Anyway, I'm not going to dance now. Inside, so I've got that particular version of I've got VS Code installed, and I've got that particular extension installed as well. The Markdown, essentially what this extension does is show in real time Markdown file edits. So you can see there it's got Markdown file test and the word test. If I change that now, it's going to live update. See, now it got a live update there. So part of this also depends on what's known as the social engineering attack. Essentially, I'm going to send the developer some type of thing, some type of link, and convince them to essentially open it on their machine. Now, this from an attack point of view, yeah, it's a bit of a barrier, but if I can convince them to do it, this is what happens. You get, this worked in testing before. Come on. I think my computer's a little bit unhappy too. This worked before. Hang on. It should have loaded. I think I know what it is. It's because I've got another thing running. Hey, there we go. I shut down that one. All right, I'm going to restart this one quickly. See, I knew one of them wasn't going to work. All I got to do is get that link to load. Oh, come on. I need to restart the VM. This has happened once before. Anyway, what should have happened is basically, yeah, it's not going to run. Well, that's annoying. Am I running the right ports? Hang on, let me check one more time. I think last time I saw this happen, it was because the port was being blocked this literally did work in testing too. Yep, no, it's not going to work. Well, that's annoying. Anyway, I've got full write-ups of this on my GitHub anyway. This is a network issue. Yeah, no, I need to restart that VM. Yeah, I'd say that's what the problem is. What I can do though is I can show you what should have loaded. Where's that ngrok? Basically, it opens an image on the page. Yeah, see? And then triggers a file download and basically opens a whole bunch of iframes. And yes, you got rickrolled. See, wasn't that worth it? That's what should be displaying, but I'm pretty sure there's a broken pipe inside my VM, which is kind of annoying because I've only seen this one time. Anyway, that's fine. We are running out of time. There is a full write-up for this on my GitHub if you want to try this at home. But yeah, please don't leave that extension installed. This one does scare me. Yeah, that is totally a VM issue. Anyway, I'm going to skip back to the Prezzo and then wrap up because we are running out of time. Knew one thing wasn't going to work today. Turns out it was that. I literally just tested it too. Anyway, Murphy's Law. Like I said, there's full write-ups on this on the Sneak website, and this is on my GitHub. So if you want to check it out, please have a look. Just some takeaways. Remember to always be scanning source code containers infrastructure, and please be aware of what you're installing in your dev environment. Like we're starting to see some really concerning vulnerabilities now appearing in dev environments when you have internet working. That's a whole other thing. Just lastly, I was going to mention that we've got SneakCon coming up. We have some really cool industry speakers that'll be at it from Twitter, from Troy Hunt from Have I Been Pawned. It's free to attend. Check it out. There's also a capture the flag if you're interested in security things. Also, just wanted to mention the DevSecOps, DevSecOps Leadership Awards, which is still open. So if you know somebody doing some amazing work in the DevSecOps space, please take the time to nominate them for one of the global awards. And finally, please remember to always use your tech superpowers for good. I know you will do, just wanted to mention it. And remember to be excellent to each other. Thank you very much. Hi, Key. There's some questions. Okay, so I'm getting for those watching at home, I'm getting some messages. I just flipped back to the screen. I'm being told there's some questions from function interfaces covered by code scanners. That is a good question, Aldrin. If you reach out to me on socials after this, I'll find out because I can't tell you off the top of my head right now. So more than happy to follow up and find out on that one. I'd say they are, but I want to check first before I say yes. Aldrin, again, what are the top 3 resources for keeping up to date with vulnerabilities, Y Combinator, Reddit, CVE, etc.? All of the above. Also, the Python security team do really cool work and are always publishing updates and alerts and stuff. In particular, too, if you're using a particular framework, quite often that framework will also push out security alerts too. So, and you see that through various ecosystem platforms. So, I would recommend subscribing to those and just seeing what is being released or what is being disclosed.
Yep, so that's all for today. Thanks, DeveloperSteve, for your talk. It was quite insightful. So for
Awesome.
now, we can move on to the next speaker. See you all later.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.